Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, or good evening, wherever you're watching us from. We'd like to welcome you to W3 Clean Tech Innovation Series. It's our third, we got our third session over this month, and we have an exciting guest for you today, Michael O'Donnell. He's a National VP for Utilities for SAP, who's really got a national perspective of some of the key trends happening around the customer experience among utilities. And once again, we have the pleasure of being joined by George Hunt. He is a Chief Strategy Officer and Head of Europe for Smart Energy Water. Just a quick reminder before we get started, please be sure to use the chat function and also engage in the platform and try to go ahead and connect with other members there as well. And also just a reminder, we will be joined again here next week for our March series, and be on the lookout for that notice in the chat. With that, I'll turn it over to George and Michael. George?
Thanks very much, Jason, and I really appreciate that. So it's great to be back. Firstly, Michael, welcome. We really appreciate you taking time out to be here, and strange times, but I hope you're doing okay.
But no, thank you.
First thing I'd quite like to ask you is, would you like to take a moment to introduce yourself? Why is clean tech interesting to you? And I'm quite keen that you let the audience know a little bit more about yourself in the context of clean tech. Who do you admire? In what sector who do you follow? Who's setting a standard, particularly on sustainability and a clean future? And what gets you excited about that? So a little bit about Michael would be.
Sure. Yeah. First of all, George, thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation today. I think it's extremely important. So first of all, a little bit about myself. As Jason alluded to, I'm the National Vice President for SAP's Utilities Vertical. I've actually been with SAP for 20 years, and the majority of that time has been in the utility space. So I've had the good fortune of seeing many evolutions in this industry over the last 20 years. And I think especially over the last handful, it's accelerated. So, and I'm looking forward to talking about that. I guess the second question you asked was, who do I admire in this industry? And it's, there's lots of people just within the utility space that I think extremely highly of, and just lots of good things going on. I'd say the person though that really comes to mind when I think about kind of our situation overall is interesting enough, Bill Gates. You think about what he's doing and what he's looking at, the book he just came out with around, avoiding how we avoid climate disaster. And you think about the work that he's doing specifically in the utility space with TerraPower. I think it's just, in hearing him talk, the holistic view that he's taking, to me is one that's so important, because this is not just one aspect. It's really everything is intertwined, and his approach to that, to me, is really what makes sense, and how we need to be approaching whatever aspect it is that we're really focused on. And even when you think about customer engagement and the things that we're really trying to do around clean tech.
I think that's a great answer. I watched a couple of documentaries about Bill Gates not very long ago, Inside Bill's Brain.
Yeah,
you've seen them, but amazing. Anybody that's listening that hasn't sort of gone on Netflix and had a look at that, definitely urge you to. He talks about reinventing the toilet and obviously the stuff around malaria and polio, etc. But the thing that really got me was the Omni processor, the third documentary. And actually, the background behind me here is actually a food processing, an energy processing plant. I have got a picture of the Omni processor. So which is an amazing piece of clean technology. It's place it anywhere in the world and turn waste product into clean water and energy. So just amazing. So yeah, you got me excited now by talking about all of that, of course. But so you mentioned you've been around SAP and utilities for 20 years. I think we've both been around this business, a fairly long time, and so much has changed. Particularly how utilities operate, what their purpose is, how they're evolving, how they serve customers,
right?
And particularly for both of us, how they've embraced technology and digitization, particularly, the accelerating rate they've done that. So I'm kind of interested in, what your take on what you think the most significant changes are during that time, and how do you think service resilience or customer experience has improved as a result of all of that? So a little bit about, what have you seen happen?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question, and it's there's multiple kind of thoughts to it, right? Because I always tell people, even though I've been at SAP for 20 years, I've probably worked at 5 different companies, and a lot of that has to do with all the evolutions that you talked about that utilities have gone through. When I started at SAP, I can remember working with a customer and having a conversation, and the customer executive made the statement, it's our job to keep the beers cold and the showers hot. So putting that in perspective, back then it was really simple, right? You had to make sure that you delivered accurate bills and the service that you were providing was reliable, right? I mean, that was pretty much the nature of what we did when I first came into this business. And then as time went on, and sad to think about it, but things like that Amazon experience started to change people's expectations of what they wanted to get from their relationship with their utility. And first it was paying your bill online, and then it was looking at your consumption, and so it's continued to evolve over time. And then you start to see kind of the smart home, right? So everything in your house is a smart device, and how that played into kind of your relationship with what your expectation was with the utility and how you control certain things. And now we're at the point where people are thinking about how they actually generate and are part of that process of maybe being their own distributed utility, whether it be solar panels on their roof, a battery storage wall, all sorts of different things that are just changing the dynamic of the relationship with energy itself. Forget about the utility, and then how that's all changing what we do as far as that interaction and engagement is concerned. So for me, this is the most exciting time that I think we've ever been in this space, and how technology is really playing a very central role into what's going to happen next in every regard, right? In the generation, in the consumption, and then in the interaction aspects of it. But it's an extremely exciting time right now, for sure.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's I think being in utilities is a sexy business now. It's
yeah.
It's,
who would have thought?
Yeah, who'd have thought? But I think the people that have been in utilities a long time have always thought, this is an amazing business to be in, whether you're in engineering, whether you're serving customers, whether you're design, construction, whatever it might be. And it's really great to see some of the technologies come forward. But the bit that and you alluded to it yourself, the bit that I'm particularly excited about is how, as a citizen, we can think of ourselves as consumers, flick the switch, turn the tap on, etc. We can think of ourselves as bill paying consumers, let's call those customers. But actually it's the evolution to the role of the citizen and the community of citizens. And it makes us all stakeholders. It makes us think differently about the role of our utilities. And I think COVID and the pandemic is also reinforced the essential nature of what they do. So I agree with you totally. It's really it really is an exciting time, and I think digitization and all that offers is coming to the utilities are probably a little bit late in their evolution, but actually it's coming at pace, and that's part of what makes it exciting.
Yeah, I almost feel like it's a little bit of a leapfrogging effect, because they were lagging, right? So you think of retail and all these other industries that were absolutely the leading indicators on customer interaction, and now you think about where utilities are at and where we're headed, and that interaction. And I really feel like it's I don't know if it's a full leapfrog, but they're definitely now much more out in front than they ever have been. And obviously all the conversations that we have and in those engagements are about what's next, and the idea of how do you address the unknown and prepare yourself for that.
Yeah, I completely agree. So let's just pick on the topic a little bit here. This is a clean tech platform. We want to talk about where utilities are going, where large consumers are going around what we might collectively think of as clean technology or green technology or green infrastructure, etc. So as I say, we know SAP very well, both of us. So And SAP is a very large company, both, you know, in terms of what it does, but you must be a large energy and water consumer around the world, as an organization in your own right. And I'm kind of interested in what are SAP doing as an organization in order to address sustainability, climate change, net zero type targets? What are you doing for yourself before we talk a little bit about what you might be doing for your customers, etc.?
Oh, it's a really good question. And, you know, I think back to, I'll say it's probably over a decade ago now. And we had a really high level of focus back in 2010 on sustainability. And it really did start with SAP. And we started to look at our own carbon consumption. And we created a tool set internally. There was a gentleman by the name of Dr. Peter Graff. I don't know if you recall him from many moons ago. We created this solution internally within SAP that measured carbon consumption, looked at kind of all the people that we had from the world, what they were doing, where they were traveling, what means they were using to travel, and then did really that estimation of the carbon emissions that were being put out. And we then turned that into a solution because it really was top of mind back then. And you start to see in the marketplace a lot of, you know, people started hiring what I'll call as chief sustainability officers, and really a lot of them were lawyers, and a lot of it was really focused on kind of, at the time there was that whole thing around the possibility around carbon tax and different things. So we were reacting to that. We were doing things internally to really, I'll say, meet those demands anyway, because that's kind of in the fabric and the nature of SAP. But it also turned into something external. And the interesting part about it is it really didn't take off. I think a lot of people were paying lip service to it at that point in time. But we've been taking that aspect of things very seriously for a very long time. And it's something that SAP's really cared about. And on another note, you know, every building that at least I know in North America that we've built, there's been a focus around how do we make that as sustainable as possible. There's different types of certification. One's a LEED program, it's called, and you know, there's different levels of that, you know, silver, gold, platinum. And I know many years ago, we built some of the first platinum LEED buildings in the mid-Atlantic, which is where I'm based. But I know it also is throughout all of North America, and having been over to Germany, knowing our buildings there are all hyper focused around making sure that we're reducing the carbon emissions. So it's been part and parcel to how we've operated for a very long time. And I think now that it's kind of come back around, we've kind of refocused as far as how we leverage that information in servicing the customers. But it's been really interesting. But it is something that SAP's always cared about, and it's been good, right? It's an important thing, and I think, you know, we've definitely led the way in that regard.
No, I agree. You know, I've seen similar. Having worked with SAP, some of that is filtered down into the partner ecosystems, as well as, you know, influence that you have on customers. So you know, that's really that's really great to know. My next question is probably a little bit more about what we collectively do to help organizations, and I'm particularly interested in what are you seeing in terms of how SAP are serving utilities or serving large industrial consumers of energy and water? What are you seeing in terms of the conversations that you're having? What are they saying to you about what the challenges are of meeting some of these targets? You know, changing their carbon footprint, towards net zero, etc. What are you talking about with them?
So it's interesting because I think a few things. It's kind of like there's different, depending upon where they reside, and the regulations that are out there, whether they're in California or somewhere on the East Coast or somewhere in the middle of the country, the regulations are different, and they're having to move at different speeds. That being said, there's not a utility that we engage with that doesn't recognize that they need to evolve and they need to set themselves up. And so there's a level of uncertainty, number one, right? That they're trying to make sure that they're prepared to be able to be ready to be able to accommodate that change that's going to take place to really do those things as far as driving, you know, a more sustainable green utility, right? So really, from an SAP perspective, what we're doing is we're trying to provide platforms that allow for that agility, that flexibility, security needed to be able to accommodate for those changes. So, it really has turned into a conversation where they're asking us, being SAP, SEW, to really come forward with platforms that allow for that flexibility. And I think our focus is making sure that we're doing that and we're really providing that. And I think the other thing that's changed that's really interesting, for many, many years, we were reacting to the needs of the utility. I think the conversations kind of flipped a little bit, and now utilities are asking us what we think and where we think things might be headed next. So that's definitely a change, and it's something that's forced us to be a little bit more, I would say, strategic in what we're preparing for and helping them prepare for. So when you think about the platforms that we do around in customer engagement together and how we go and serve our customers, we're certainly providing that point of view along with that flexible platform.
I think what came to my mind as you were talking then was that SAP have moved from being a sort of product company, a service company, to being a real stakeholder in a large set of outcomes that we all care about, particularly around addressing climate change, addressing service resilience and things like that, as well as water scarcity and all of those things that are actually pretty important to us. So I'm kind of what are you what kind of conversations are you having around things like smart cities and circular economies, and how is that changing the way you're developing as an organization, and also I'm going to ask you in a moment about how your market is changing in terms of competitiveness for what you do. So
yeah, I guess the first part is, I kind of alluded to it. It's this unknown factor, and I do think people know that change is happening, and they need to accommodate for those changes when it comes to sustainability, right? People recognize that getting to a carbon neutral, carbon zero, carbon positive, even I've heard that out there, stance, it's going to take a lot of work in every aspect of the supply chain of utility, right? From how they generate to how they transmit, distribute, and the whole 9 yards. And then you start to think about all the different options that are out there and that are available as far as technologies are concerned, and how they could all play together, right? And the interrelation of those coming together to really create that future grid and future experience for the customer. And so the conversations really do settle back on that ability to make sure that we're providing a platform that's flexible in nature, that can handle that evolution as it comes forth, as the regulations come forward. And so they can have that agility to be able to quickly pivot and provide kind of the new types of services that people are going to actually require, right, in the future. So it's certainly, it really does come back to the core platforms that we're providing, and those platforms being open, flexible, and agile in nature. And also, I can't emphasize enough secure, right? Because there's so many different things now coming at us as far as data from across the grid. Everything is sensorized, everything is smart, everything is communicating information. And that all plays into kind of the overall picture of what the future is going to look like. And for us collectively, it's important that we're able to accommodate for those things. And so it's an exciting time. And it's certainly, the conversation keeps happening over and over again about making sure we're providing the right base platform.
Do you think, quick question for you around the nature of the utility. Do you think the utilities themselves are evolving into platform businesses where they're running an ecosystem of supply and demand, where they're perhaps brokering the use of resources and becoming smart resource companies or recycling companies, if you're looking at the circular economy and water, etc.? What's your view there?
I think we're at the very early stages of that, but you can see certain things starting to transpire that are going to play into that in the future. And there are certain parts and places in the United States where that's happening faster than others. But it is absolutely happening, but it's happening at different speeds. The one big concern I hear, from a regulatory perspective is some of the traditional utilities are somewhat confined, right, in their ability to be able to evolve very quickly because of the constraints that are on them. And so I think, the other aspect of this, and we haven't talked about it a ton, is just, how the regulations play into, a traditional utility's ability to be able to be what they need to be in the future. And so that's going to be an interesting part of this whole puzzle as well.
No, I agree with you. I think the nature of regulation to some extent has been a real enabler, but also it's been an inhibitor in some ways. And sometimes it's skewed the activities of a utility. I know from my own background that, we used to get rewarded for pouring concrete, for building concrete assets, because they would become a regulated asset and we could recover the cost. We're moving into a world where we're much more interested in how we can recover energy from waste and how we can use less water, use less energy, and start to recycle or reuse some of that. So yeah, it's in. I think the role of regulators, or the purpose of regulation, is very important. That leads us quite nicely onto a question that we've got from the audience, which is whether if you think about this as a citizen, you're based over there in Pennsylvania, or if you think of this from a large industrial and commercial consumer, how much importance do you think us as consumers or large organizations should place on managing their own energy, managing their own water, understanding their consumption, becoming a real stakeholder in achieving an outcome?
Yeah, so I'll take it first from a personal perspective. I think it's extremely important, being part of this industry for many years. It's something that you recognize the effects of what we do as individuals in the overall scheme of the industry, whether it be your waste or how you're consuming electricity or anything else. So to me, it's extremely relevant and important that we think about all the aspects of how we can conserve, right? How we can be sustainable at an individual level. So to me, everybody should be thinking that way. I think a lot more people today are than ever have been. But I still think a lot more education needs to be done. I think when people hear about climate disaster and hear about carbon emissions, and then how that kind of trickles all the way down to individually what we're doing, I don't think it gets all the way down to that level. People know maybe shut the faucet off when they're brushing their teeth or whatever, but they're not really thinking about, like, how do I really lower my carbon footprint, and what does that really mean, and what are the steps I need to do to get to that. Overall, from a corporate perspective, I think, like I said, I'm proud to work at the company I work at, and I know, partnering with SEW and how top of mind it is for you guys as well. It's an imperative, right? And I think a lot of what we do at that corporate level will dictate what you see down at the individual level. And so to me, every corporation, every company should be having this be not just an initiative that they're doing. It really should be completely intertwined into the fabric of how they operate. And there is a difference, right? Like I said, 10 years ago, when we were first having these conversations, it was an initiative. I think now, today, you see more and more it be part and parcel to what it is that they're trying to do and the purpose of the organization. And that goes not just for sustainability, but also things like diversity and inclusion. So there's a big, broader, I think, discussion to be had around, the purpose of a company. And it's not just to produce XYZ product or perform this service. It really is about how you operate and taking those things into account.
No, I wholly agree with that. I think there are companies around the world that have an obligation to understand their purpose and their contribution towards the greater outcome that we're after here, which is to address the global challenges around the climate, around economic prosperity, around hunger, all of those things that are really nicely captured by the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals. They're a North Star for quite a lot of the organizations that we're sort of talking with. We're coming up towards, we've got a couple of minutes to go. I'm really interested in what do you see on the horizon? What are you, if I think about your immediate lens in front of you, that's really interesting. Sure. To us all the time. But what are you seeing on that sort of horizon 2, horizon 3 lend, particularly as we head towards smart cities, so more solar power, more renewable power, more recovery from energy recovery from waste, and electric vehicles, of course, and all the infrastructure necessary behind that. What are you seeing on that sort of 5-10 year horizon?
Yeah, I think that acceleration that I talked about earlier is only going to get faster, and the evolution of where we're about to go is going to happen very quickly. I think we're on the edge of that tipping point in every regard, from how we actually generate and how we consume to everything that we do. I think it's going to become more and more centered around, are we being sustainable? Are we reducing our carbon footprint? And are we doing it thoughtfully and in the right way? And I think we're going to see a massive amount of change in the next decade. So, you're already seeing it in the car industry with that shift from fossil fuels to electric and other things. And I think that's going to really, really accelerate here over the next 5 years. I think you're already seeing in the utility space that shift from, different types of fossil fuels to renewables, but also, different ways of how they're engaging and really empowering, I'll say, the end state customer, and how they kind of can be, accountable for their own personal footprint, as well as how they consume, energy. So I think it's going to be massive. I think we'll see more change in the next 10 years. I think if we're sitting here 10 years from now having this conversation, the utility industry will look fundamentally different. I firmly believe that. And I've been saying for, years when we talk about these things that, the utilities industry is much like the telco industry from 25, 30 years ago, when you went from hard wires to cellular. It never takes the exact shape you think it's going to take. But one thing is very clear: it will not look the same as it does today. We are changing, and we're all going to be, playing a role in that. And I think it's important that, we all think about kind of the end state that we want to have, because we're the ones shaping it, right? So it's going to be exciting.
No, you're right, of course, and that's a really nice segue to just a nice way of wrapping up our conversation. And I've really enjoyed talking to you today. But we've got a nice question that's come in that is sort of in the context of what you just said, which is should we and I think we is probably trying to sort of wrap up, us as citizens, we as utilities, we as service providers to utilities, or people looking to connect people around the world to have a conversation about these things that matter. Is our role to be stewards, of the environment, or stewards of finite resources? Is that the greater purpose of a utility and what we do?
So I believe, I think it's more than just being a steward. I think this is our opportunity to have the really challenging, difficult conversations about what we all want to see, right, in the future, and for the generations to come. And you don't always get the opportunity to have this amount of change, the impact and the change that's about to happen. And I think it's imperative that we have the hard and difficult conversations, and really be the ones driving kind of what we want to see as far as the outcomes are concerned. So for me, it's an imperative, right? It's not a hey, we should be taking part in this conversation. We really should be driving it as the collective we. And we're doing it. The conversations are happening, so we need to be the ones that are making sure that the right things are happening, so we get to that right end state.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely spot on in that. I think this kind of platform that we're talking on here is actually I think the purpose of that is actually to enable the right conversations and keep the conversation going, and use those conversations to shape outcomes and shape values and strategies and behaviors and so on going forward. We're just about to wrap up here. Can I ask you one more quick question, which has come in on the chat?
Sure, go ahead.
If you see the same question I can, but I'm asking you either as a citizen or as a vice president of a very large organization serving this industry. What would you put on a billboard here in terms of a tip for either sustainability, clean technology, utility strategy? What would you put on a billboard?
Wow. Wow, that is a really good question. You know, can I have like 50 billboards and there's all sorts of things, but I do think you know, there has to be a starting point to it, and it does start with kind of the prior question, right? About what's your personal impact and what's your personal level of accountability that plays into the broader spectrum. And so I don't know exactly the phrase I would put on a billboard, but it would definitely be something related to, I think, you know, what is your personal accountability to make this world a more sustainable place, and all those things that come out as far as, you know, climate change and climate disaster and reducing CO2 emissions and how we live every day and how that impacts that broader thing. I think it really is about, it starts with us, and it starts with what we do as individuals, not just at home, but really what we do in the jobs that we have, and making sure that everything that we're doing is really helping push that agenda forward to make it better for the generations to come.
I love that. That's a fantastic answer, Michael. Thanks so much. All about the personal impact. Fantastic. Thank you for that. All right, I think we're just about done now. So I'm going to hand back to Jason just to wrap things up. But you know, first of all, Mike, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much. I really
Yeah, you
enjoyed
too.
that.
Really enjoyed the conversation.
Take care and stay
Thanks,
safe.
George. Yeah, you do the same.
Cheers.
Thank you, George. Thank you, Michael. Really appreciate your leadership and stewardship of this industry, really helping us drive this very important conversation forward. I think a lot of you out there who have followed this conversation really understand the importance of keeping this top of mind, to keep the ideas out there, to help the partnerships, and as I think, as Michael said, let the right conversations happen, and let's not take our foot off the pedal to lose that momentum. So with that, we will wrap up. We will be back next week with Dr. Andrea Ruotolo. She is a Senior Director of Grid Modernization and Innovation for Liberty Utilities. Next week, March 4th, we will be at 10:30 a.m. Central. We will move up 1 hour in time. But thank you so much for your time. And this recording will be available by the end of the day. Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
We'll see you. Thank you.
Thank you.